Hi Thalíe, my name is Jorge Mantilla and welcome to Duale Schule. We are so happy to have you here. How are you? How do you feel to be here?
Fine, thanks. I'm very glad to be here with you to share my experience on creating Indómita.
Good, Thalíe. We have a game for you. This game is about responding questions. You need to pick a paper from the bucket.
Okay, that bucket?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thalíe, how did you get to become a journalist?
Okay, I really wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write novels and short stories, just as Jorge. But I was looking for options in here in Ecuador to study and to pursue that career, and I didn't find anything that really suited me. So I started looking for other options, and then I ended up in journalism, and it wasn't like my passion at the beginning because I was just discovering what was it about, and then I started like reading a lot of newspapers and media outlets, and now I can say that it is really my passion.
Okay.
Okay. Oh.
How was your work during the pandemic?
It was kind of weird. It was very interesting because I just left my work as a journalist in a newspaper. I was working in a newspaper and I was there for 3 years, and then during the pandemic I just started a new job as communications officer in a university, a local university. So I was a lot of time at home doing home office, you know, and it was very different because I had like a lot of time to do other stuff and to be with my cats. I have 3 cats, but then I just had 2, and with my husband, and it was like a time for adaptation, to know new things, to learn new things, and to discover what's happening in the world. And I think it was very interesting to have like this period of, I don't know, in home and doing other stuff I wasn't used to, and also it gave me time to start Indomita. Okay, free.
How did you get to become Indomita's director?
I created Indómita myself with a partner. It was actually a project on my thesis for obtaining the master's degree in digital journalism. So I had this idea like a lot of time before. I wanted to create a media outlet that focuses on women's stories and LGBTIQ population, because I was looking for content on that area in here in Ecuador, and it was like I felt there was like a lack of this content in here in Ecuador, but also the content that I was looking or finding, it was like not well focused, you know, because women were like sub-represented or not represented at all. So I started doing an investigation. That was like the first part of Indomita, a very deep investigation on media outlets, on the media industry, on how to create a media. Indomita is just focused on digital areas, so we don't print stuff or things. So that was also part of the investigation. How does it work? Like, how does media outlets like this, native digital, work? And that was like the first part. Then we started writing and finding what stories we want to tell. The first big story was gender-based violence in the Galapagos Islands. I don't know if you had a chance to check it out, but we went to the Galapagos Islands with my partner, my media partner, and we were there and interviewed a lot of people, and that's how we launched Indómita, with that big first story.
Okay.
First. I get nervous too. Maria Amelia.
Did you have to cover any news during that difficult time?
So yeah, I was telling you about this story that we covered in the Galapagos Islands. That was actually during the pandemic. We were there during the pandemic, but also we were covering a story of a femicide that occurred during the pandemic. And it was very challenging how to tell the story, to like write about it, and how to focus it because this woman, she was, I don't know, this is a very, very sad topic because this woman was assassinated by her ex-husband in the Galapagos Islands, and the pandemic was there. You know, everything was stopped. You know, there were no cars, no services, no anything, no tourism. And given that people was in their homes, nobody listened or view or see what happened, you know, and it was very sad. This story particularly was very, very sad. And as a journalist, you have to be open-minded, to listen to people, know how to emotionally treat people when you interview them, like how to ask questions. You have to have a lot of empathy and respect for the stories you are covering. And I think that story particularly was like very, very challenging. And it has like 3 parts, you know. The first part, that's like the investigation prior to going to the place. In this case, it was the Galapagos Islands. And then like the interview process and the gathering of information. And the third part, that was then writing and featuring the story in the website. Like, how are we going to present it?
Is there anything you don't like about your job? Why?
That's a very hard question. I think that I love my job. I love doing journalism, but it can be very challenging, and as I was telling you. And I think that there's a part of naming myself as a feminist journalist that's very challenging with my colleagues, because they have like this look of what I do that it's very, I don't know how to define it, but they have like a lot of questions for me, you know, like, is it really journalism what you're doing, or is it activism? You know, yeah, I think it's journalism, but they ask me that, like, are you sure you are not doing activism? Because when you tag the type of journalism I do as feminist journalism, then people start asking these questions. But I think that our work in Indómita speaks for itself.
Okay, thank you.
How did you handle the beginning of the pandemic and lockdown?
I think I somehow answered that question before when Justin asked me about the lockdown and the pandemic. But I think that it was like a period of adaptation and to maintain calm, because as I am married, I don't live with my parents, for example, and I was very anxious about what challenges they were facing in their own lockdowns. And my sister lives in Buenos Aires, in Argentina and other countries, so I felt like very far away from her. But it was a time to also learn, like, for example, in my job, like to do interviews or things like that, to learn new tools and also new concepts and new things that I think they were there like all the time, but this lockdown gave us like the opportunity to have another vision and more time to pursue these things and to start discovering them.
Why did you become so interested in women's rights?
I think it has to do with the stories I started covering as a journalist. When I started writing or doing journalism, I started covering the economic section. So in that time, I felt that journalism was not for me, you know. But now I know that it happened to me because I wasn't like connected to the stories I was telling, because I was doing like economics and macroeconomics and I don't know, like oil price and that stuff, and I wasn't like connected to the stories I was telling. But then in the newspaper I was working, they told me like, hey, there's a vacancy and you can go to another section. It was called Society, and in Society they covered education topics, environmental topics, and also women's rights. And I started covering these stories, and there was one in particular that I felt like really, really connected. It was about women that do not want to be mothers. And they were called NOMOs, because no mothers. And I interviewed one woman that was like in her 20s. She was like 26 years old, and another woman that was in her 30s, and another in their 40s, and another in her 50s. And each one of them gave me like a view of why they didn't want to become mothers and why it was like so important to them. And it was very interesting because when we published that story, it was like the top one in the website of El Comercio. But also it was the one that has the most negative comments to these women. They were telling them like, it is your mission to be a mother because you are a woman, and why do you think you have the right to decide this yourself? Like, your only purpose in this life is to be a mother. Then you are unuseful as a woman. You know, and reading these kind of comments from the audience, it gave me like another perspective of what was going on with women in Ecuador, and what stories were not being told, and what stories we needed to start telling as journalists. And I think that was the beginning of everything, you know, of the kind of journalism I do. And then I started covering another things as femicide and gender-based violence, and that also started giving me a new perspective of things that were happening in Ecuador, and journalism was not covering it like in the right way or in the way that we need to tell things in order to awake society to make change.
I know you won the Jorge Mantilla Ortega Prize. What do you feel when you won this award?
It was a very inspiring moment for me because in that particular edition of the prize, we were a lot of women in winning in the different categories of the prize. You know, I won the interview category, but an former boss of mine won the opinion category, and a very loved colleague, she won the reportage category. So it was very inspiring to know, in the first place, women as journalists can start to be recognized for what we are doing, because I think we've always done like marvelous work and very admiring. But in that moment I felt this can be started, this can start to be recognized by other people, by society, by our colleagues, male and female. But it also gave me hope to know that my interview was about feminism. And feminism can be a bad word in some places, you know. in some educational spaces or even in media outlets in newsrooms. When I was starting to call myself a feminist, I felt that like some colleagues were starting to judge me because I was a feminist. But then winning this prize as a feminist journalist, with an interview to another feminist journalist, it was very, very hopeful, like for the kind of journalism I do, and for other women that I know that are studying in the universities, and then that I know they want to do the kind of journalism I do. I know because they have like text me or they find me on social media and they are like, hey, I read your story, it was very interesting, what do you recommend for me, for my story, what angle should I take? And I know they're like trying to pursue the thing I am doing and the kind of journalism I'm doing. And I know that prize, that's a message for all of them. A message that says, keep going and do this and tell these stories because they matter.